Soldier dies in her arms on a freezing battlefield. But when he comes back to life, what he tells her will shake the very foundation of everything she believes. Was it just a dream, or something more? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The morning mist clung to the fields of Yorkshire like a shroud, thick and cold, as if the earth itself mourned the countless souls lost to the war that had ravaged the northern territories for 3 brutal years. The conflict between King Edmund's forces and the rebellious northern lords had left the land scarred, villages burned, and families torn apart. In the heart of this devastation stood Thornfield Manor, a sprawling stone fortress that had been converted into a makeshift healing sanctuary for wounded soldiers returning from the battlefields. Lady Rosalind Merrick moved through the main hall with practiced grace, her long gown of deep burgundy wool trailing behind her. The dress was lined with fur at the collar and cuffs, embroidered with intricate patterns of silver thread that caught the dim candlelight. Her dark auburn hair was braided and pinned beneath a simple veil, though several loose tendrils framed her face, softening the intensity of her striking green eyes. At 23 years of age, she possessed a beauty that turned heads even in these dark times, but it was her compassion and unwavering dedication to the wounded that truly defined her. The hall had been transformed into rows of simple cots, each occupied by a soldier bearing the marks of war. The air was heavy with the scent of herbal poultices, burning sage, and the underlying metallic tang of blood. Rosalind had spent the last 2 years of her life here, ever since her father, Lord Edmund Merrick, had offered their ancestral home as a sanctuary for the king's wounded warriors. Her mother had passed during childbirth when Rosalind was merely 10 years old, and her father had raised her with an uncommon education for a woman of her station, teaching her to read, to understand the management of estates, and most importantly, to value compassion above all else. "My lady," called Martha, the head healer, an older woman with silver hair tucked beneath a worn linen cap. Her face was lined with age and wisdom, her hands steady despite her 60 years. "We have new arrivals from the northern front. 6 men, all in grave condition. The captain says they barely survived the ambush at Riverdale." Rosalind's heart clenched at the mention of Riverdale. The battle there had been particularly vicious, a surprise attack by the northern rebels that had decimated an entire company of the king's men. She nodded solemnly and followed Martha toward the entrance, where the newly arrived soldiers were being carried in on makeshift stretchers. The scene that greeted her was heartbreaking. 6 men, their armor dented and bloodied, their faces pale with pain and exhaustion. Some groaned in agony, while others lay eerily silent, their breathing shallow and labored. The servants and other healers rushed to assess their wounds, carefully removing damaged armor and cutting away blood-soaked clothing to reveal the extent of their injuries. Rosalind's eyes swept across the wounded men until they landed on the last stretcher being carried through the heavy wooden doors. The man lying there was different from the others. Despite the blood that matted his dark hair and stained his torn leather jerkin, despite the pallor of his skin and the terrible wound visible beneath his ribs, there was something striking about him. His features were strong and noble, with a square jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble, high cheekbones, and a straight nose that had clearly been broken at least once in his life. Even unconscious and near death, he possessed a commanding presence that drew her attention. "That one is the worst, my lady," Martha said quietly, noticing Rosalind's fixed gaze. "Captain Aldrich Brennan, from what his men told us, a knight of considerable reputation, apparently, led the charge at Riverdale and saved dozens of his men before taking a sword to the chest. They say he fought like a demon even as he bled, refusing to fall until every last soldier under his command had retreated to safety. But I fear his time may be short. The wound has festered during the journey, and he has lost far too much blood." Rosalind felt her chest tighten with an emotion she could not quite name. She had tended to hundreds of wounded soldiers over the past 2 years, had held the hands of dying men and whispered prayers over their cooling bodies, but something about this particular warrior called to her in a way she had never experienced before. Perhaps it was the tragic nobility of his sacrifice, or perhaps it was something deeper, something she could not yet understand. "Bring him to the private chamber on the eastern wing," Rosalind commanded, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "I will tend to him myself." Martha's eyebrows rose in surprise. The private chamber was reserved for nobles or officers of the highest rank, and it had been empty for months. My lady, are you certain? We know little about him beyond his name and rank. He may be a common knight with no family or fortune to speak of. He is a man who saved the lives of his soldiers at the cost of his own, Rosalind replied firmly. That makes him worthy of the finest care we can provide. Please, Martha, see to it immediately. The older woman nodded, respect shining in her weathered eyes. As you wish, my lady. I will have the room prepared at once. Within the hour, Captain Aldrich Brennan had been carefully transported to the eastern chamber, a spacious room with tall windows that overlooked the manor's gardens, now bare and frost-covered in the grip of winter. A fire had been lit in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls and filling the room with welcome warmth. Rosalind supervised as the servants gently laid the unconscious knight upon the large bed, its frame carved from dark oak and dressed with thick furs and wool blankets. Once they were alone, Rosalind began the careful work of assessing his injuries. She cut away the remainder of his clothing with practiced efficiency, revealing a body that spoke of years of training and warfare. His chest was broad and muscular, his arms thick with the kind of strength that came from wielding a sword daily. Scars crisscrossed his torso, each one telling a story of past battles and narrow escapes. But it was the fresh wound that demanded her immediate attention, a deep puncture beneath his right ribs that wept blood and clear fluid, the edges inflamed and hot to the touch. You fought too hard and too long, brave knight, Rosalind whispered as she gathered her supplies. Clean linen bandages, a basin of hot water infused with healing herbs, a sharp knife for cutting away damaged flesh, and a needle with thread for stitching. Now you must fight to stay with us. She worked through the afternoon and into the evening, cleaning the wound with painstaking care, removing fragments of leather and metal that had been driven into his flesh by the force of the blade that had struck him. The infection had indeed taken hold, and she knew that the next few days would determine whether he lived or died. She applied a poultice made from yarrow, comfrey, and honey, herbs known for their ability to fight corruption and promote healing, then carefully wrapped his torso with clean bandages. Throughout the entire process, Aldrich never stirred, never made a sound. His breathing remained shallow and rapid, his skin burning with fever. Rosalind placed a cool cloth on his forehead and settled into the chair beside the bed, determined to keep vigil through the night. She had done this countless times before, sitting beside dying soldiers, offering what comfort she could in their final hours. Yet somehow, this felt different. She found herself studying his face in the firelight, noting the way his dark lashes rested against his cheeks, the strong line of his jaw, the fullness of his lips even as they were cracked and dry from fever. "Who are you, Aldrich Brennan?" she asked softly, though she expected no answer. "What drives a man to sacrifice himself so completely for others? What dreams did you harbor before war claimed you?" The night deepened, and still Rosalind maintained her vigil. She bathed his fevered skin with cool water, changed his bandages when they became soaked with blood and fluid, and forced small amounts of willow bark tea between his lips to help combat the fever. Martha checked on them twice during the night, offering to relieve Rosalind so she could rest. But the young woman refused. She could not explain the compulsion that kept her there, the feeling that if she left his side, he would slip away into death's embrace. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky with streaks of pale gold and rose, Aldrich's condition began to deteriorate rapidly. His breathing became more labored, his fever spiking to dangerous levels. His skin took on an ashen quality, and his lips began to turn blue. Rosalind's heart raced with panic as she realized he was dying, that despite all her efforts, she was losing him. "No," she whispered fiercely, leaning over him and placing her hands on either side of his face. "No, you will not die. Do you hear me, Captain Brennan? You did not survive that battlefield only to die in this bed. You must fight. You must live." But her words seemed to have no effect. His breathing grew shallower, the spaces between each breath growing longer and more pronounced. Rosalind felt tears streaming down her face as she watched the life draining from him. She had seen this too many times before, this moment when a soul began its journey from the mortal world. Acting on pure instinct, she gathered him into her arms as best she could, cradling his head against her chest, her tears falling onto his fevered face. "Please," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "Please don't leave. The world needs men like you. I need you to live." For what felt like an eternity but was likely only minutes, Aldrich's chest ceased to rise and fall. His body went completely still in her arms, the fever heat beginning to fade from his skin. Rosalind held him tighter, her heart shattering into countless pieces. She had never felt such profound loss for a stranger, such consuming grief for a man she had never even spoken to. The connection she felt to him defied all logic and reason, yet it was undeniably real. A pull so strong it felt as if her own soul was being torn from her body. She pressed her forehead against his, her tears mingling with the sweat on his skin, and whispered prayers to every saint she had ever learned about, begging for mercy, for a miracle, for just one more chance. The room was silent except for her quiet sobs and the crackling of the fire. Time seemed to stop, the world holding its breath. And then, impossibly, miraculously, she felt it. The slightest flutter against her chest. A breath, so faint she almost thought she had imagined it. Then another, and another. Rosalind pulled back slightly, her eyes wide with disbelief as she watched color slowly begin to return to Aldrich's face. His chest began to rise and fall with more strength, his breathing steadying into a more natural rhythm. The deathly pallor that had claimed him moments before was receding, replaced by the flush of fever once more. Thank God, Rosalind breathed, fresh tears streaming down her face, though these were tears of relief and joy rather than grief. Thank God, thank God. She carefully laid him back against the pillows, her hands shaking as she checked his pulse, finding it stronger than it had been hours before. The fever still raged, but he was alive, unmistakably alive. She worked quickly to change his sweat-soaked bandages and bedding, then resumed her vigil, watching him with a mixture of exhaustion and wonder. The fever broke on the third day, just as the winter sun was setting beyond the frost-covered gardens of Thornfield Manor. Rosalind had barely left Aldrich's side during those 72 hours, snatching only brief moments of sleep in the chair beside his bed. Martha had brought her meals that she barely touched, and her father had visited twice, expressing concern for her health and well-being. But Rosalind had waved away their worries with a determination that surprised even herself. She was changing his bandages for what felt like the 100th time when she noticed the difference. The angry red inflammation around his wound had begun to fade, replaced by the healthier pink of healing tissue. The fever heat that had radiated from his skin had diminished to a more normal warmth. His breathing, which had been labored and irregular, now came in steady, peaceful rhythms. Most remarkably, the deathly pallor had completely vanished, his skin now showing the healthy bronze of a man who had spent years under the sun. Rosalind sat back in her chair, allowing herself a moment of pure relief. He would live. Against all odds, Captain Aldrich Brennan would survive. She found herself studying his face once more, noticing details she had been too frightened to appreciate during his crisis. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow, another along his jawline. His hands, which lay relaxed on the furs covering him, were calloused and strong, the hands of a warrior who had wielded sword and shield since boyhood. She wondered what color his eyes would be, what his voice would sound like, what thoughts occupied his mind when he was not fighting for king and country. As if in response to her musings, Aldrich's eyelids began to flutter. Rosalind leaned forward, her heart suddenly racing with an emotion she could not quite name. She watched as his eyes slowly opened, revealing irises of the most striking blue she had ever seen, the color of a clear summer sky, bright and intense even in his weakened state. For a long moment he simply stared at the ceiling, his brow furrowed in confusion as he tried to make sense of his surroundings. Then his gaze shifted to her, and their eyes met. Rosalind felt something shift deep within her chest, as if the world had suddenly tilted on its axis. Aldrich's expression transformed from confusion to something else entirely, something that looked almost like recognition, though that made no sense. They had never met before, she was certain of that. Yet the way he was looking at her with such intensity and wonder made her feel as if he could see straight into her soul. "You," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse and illness. "I know you." Rosalind's breath caught in her throat. "I am Lady Rosalind Merrick," she said softly, reaching for a cup of water and carefully helping him take a few small sips. "This is my father's estate, Thornfield Manor. You were brought here 3 days ago, gravely wounded from the battle at Riverdale. You have been very ill, Captain Brennan, but the worst has passed now." Aldrich accepted the water gratefully, though his eyes never left her face. When he had drunk his fill, He lay back against the pillows, still watching her with that same intense, almost unsettling focus. "That is not what I meant," he said, his voice growing slightly stronger. "I saw you before, when I was dying." A chill ran down Rosalind's spine. She remembered those terrible moments when she had held him in her arms, when his heart had stopped, and she had been certain she had lost him. "You were unconscious," she said carefully. "You had no breath, no heartbeat. For several minutes, you were gone from us." "I know," Aldrich replied, and there was something in his expression that made Rosalind's skin prickle with goosebumps. "I remember leaving my body. I remember the darkness, and then the light. And in that light, I saw you. You were there, in a place that was not this world. A place of peace and beauty beyond description. You were wearing white, and your hair was unbound, falling around your shoulders like a waterfall of dark fire. You were standing in a garden more beautiful than anything I have ever seen, with flowers that seemed to glow with their own light, and trees that whispered secrets in a language I could not understand." Rosalind felt her hands beginning to tremble. "That is impossible," she whispered. But even as she spoke the words, she felt the truth of what he was saying resonating in her bones. "Such things do not happen." "And yet they did," Aldrich insisted, his blue eyes burning with conviction. "You looked at me with such compassion, such understanding. You did not speak, but I heard your voice in my heart, telling me it was not yet my time, that I had to return. You reached out your hand to me, and when I tried to take it, I woke here, in this room, with you sitting beside me just as you are now. Tell me, my lady, am I mad? Did the fever cook my brain? Or did I truly see what I believe I saw?" Rosalind struggled to find words. Everything he described was impossible, flew in the face of reason and logic. And yet, she could not deny the sincerity in his voice, the certainty in his eyes. More than that, she could not deny the profound connection she had felt to him from the moment he had been brought through the doors of Thornfield Manor, a connection that defied explanation. "I do not know what you experienced, Captain Brennan," she finally said, choosing her words carefully. "I know only that you nearly died, that your heart stopped beating and your breath left your body. I held you in my arms and begged God not to take you. And then, by some mercy I cannot explain, you came back to us. Perhaps what you saw was a fever dream, a trick of your mind as it hovered between life and death. Or perhaps it was something else entirely. I am not wise enough to say." Aldrich continued to watch her, and slowly, a faint smile touched his lips, transforming his stern features into something warmer, more approachable. "You are being diplomatic, my lady. You think me addled by illness. But I assure you, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I saw you in that place of light, and I knew that I had to return because of you. My purpose is not yet fulfilled, and somehow, you are part of that purpose." Before Rosalind could respond, the door to the chamber opened, and Martha entered, carrying a tray with fresh bandages and a steaming bowl of broth. The older woman's eyes widened with delight when she saw that Aldrich was awake and alert. "Praise be," Martha exclaimed, hurrying to the bedside. "Captain Brennan, you have given us all quite a fright. It is good to see you among the living once more." She shot a knowing glance at Rosalind. "My lady, you should rest now. You have not left this room for 3 days, and you are exhausted. I can tend to the captain's needs, while you take some proper sleep and nourishment." Rosalind wanted to protest, but she knew Martha was right. Her body ached from sitting in the chair for so long, her eyes burned with fatigue, and her stomach was empty, save for the few bites of bread and cheese she had managed to force down over the past days. Still, she found herself reluctant to leave, as if some invisible thread connected her to Aldrich, and leaving the room would snap that thread. "Go, my lady," Aldrich said gently, and there was something in his voice that made her look at him once more. "You have saved my life through your tireless care. I will not dishonor that gift by allowing you to damage your own health on my account. Rest, and I will still be here when you return. I promise you that." The weight of that promise settled over Rosalind like a warm cloak. She nodded slowly and rose from her chair, her legs unsteady after so many hours of sitting. "Very well. But Martha, if there is any change, any sign of distress, you must send for me immediately." "Of course, my lady," Martha assured her with a gentle smile. "Now go before you collapse where you stand." Rosalind left the chamber reluctantly, glancing back once to find Aldrich still watching her, his blue eyes following her until the door closed between them. She made her way to her own chambers in a daze, her mind churning with everything that had happened. She had witnessed many things in her years as a healer, had seen men recover from injuries that should have killed them, had watched others die from wounds that seemed minor, but she had never experienced anything like this. This inexplicable connection to a stranger, this feeling that their lives had become intertwined by forces beyond their understanding. Her maidservant, Claire, was waiting for her with a hot bath and fresh clothing. The young woman fussed over Rosalind like a mother hen, helping her out of her stained gown and into the steaming water, washing her hair and murmuring about how thin she had become and how pale she looked. Rosalind barely registered the words, her thoughts consumed by Aldrich's claim that he had seen her in some realm beyond death. After her bath, dressed in a clean sleeping gown with her hair brushed and braided, Rosalind fell into her bed and into a deep, dreamless sleep. She slept for nearly 12 hours, her exhausted body finally demanding the rest it so desperately needed. When she woke, the sun was high in the sky, streaming through her windows and warming her face. For a moment she lay still, remembering everything that had happened, half convinced it had all been some strange dream. But no, it had been real. Aldrich was alive, awake, and claiming to have seen her in some heavenly realm. Rosalind rose quickly, dressing in a gown of deep green wool trimmed with fox fur at the collar and sleeves, the fabric embroidered with delicate patterns of vines and leaves in gold thread. She braided her hair and pinned it in a coronet around her head, allowing a few soft tendrils to frame her face. Looking at herself in the polished bronze mirror, she wondered why she was taking such care with her appearance, why it suddenly mattered that she looked presentable. She found her father, Lord Edmund Merrick, breaking his fast in the small dining hall. He was a tall man in his late 50s, his once dark hair now heavily streaked with silver, his face lined with the cares of managing a large estate during wartime. His eyes, the same green as Rosalind's own, lit up when he saw her enter. "Daughter," he said warmly, rising to embrace her. "Martha tells me you have finally rested. I was beginning to worry you would make yourself ill with your devotion to that wounded captain. She also tells me he has awakened and appears to be on the path to recovery. That is good news indeed." Rosalind returned her father's embrace, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "He is a remarkable man, Father. He saved his entire company at Riverdale, fought until every last soldier under his command had reached safety. Men like that deserve our finest efforts." Lord Edmund studied his daughter's face with the keen perception of a parent who knows their child well. "There is something more," he observed. "I see it in your eyes, Rosalind. This captain has affected you in some way beyond the usual compassion you show to all the wounded who come through our doors." Rosalind hesitated, then decided there was no point in trying to hide her feelings from her father. They had always been close, especially after her mother's death, and he had never judged her or dismissed her thoughts as foolish. "He claims to have seen me when he was dying," she said quietly. "He described a vision of me in some heavenly realm, says that I was the reason he chose to return to life. Father, I do not know what to make of it. Part of me says it was merely fever dreams, the hallucinations of a dying mind. But another part of me cannot dismiss it so easily. There is something about him, some connection I cannot explain." Her father was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "I have lived long enough to know that there are mysteries in this world that defy our understanding," he finally said. "Your mother, God rest her soul, used to say that some souls are meant to find each other, that they recognize one another across time and distance by some means we cannot comprehend. Perhaps this captain is such a soul for you, daughter. Or perhaps his experience was simply the product of illness and injury. Time will tell which is true." "Are you not concerned?" Rosalind asked. "That I speak of connections and feelings for a man I do not even know? A common knight with no lands or fortune?" Lord Edmund smiled gently. "Captain Aldrich Brennan is hardly common from what I have learned. He is the youngest son of Lord Robert Brennan of Ashford, a respected family in the Southern Territories. He chose the path of a warrior rather than waiting for whatever small inheritance might come to him as a third son, and he has earned a considerable reputation for his skill in battle and his loyalty to the king. More importantly, he is a man of honor who values the lives of his soldiers above his own glory. Those qualities matter far more to me than lands or titles." He placed a hand on Rosalind's shoulder. "You have my blessing to follow your heart in this matter, wherever it may lead you." I trust your judgment, and I trust that God has brought this man to our home for a reason." Tears pricked at Rosalind's eyes, gratitude swelling in her chest. "Thank you, Father. Your faith in me means more than I can express." "Now go," Lord Edmund said with a smile. "I suspect you are eager to check on your patient. I will have Cook prepare something nourishing for him. A man recovering from such injuries needs proper food to rebuild his strength." Rosalind made her way back to the eastern chamber, her heart beating faster with each step. She knocked softly before entering, finding Martha just finishing changing Aldrich's bandages. The improvement in his condition was remarkable. The color had fully returned to his face, and though he was clearly still weak, there was an alertness in his eyes that had been absent before. "Ah, my lady," Martha said with a warm smile, "your patient has been asking after you." "I told him you would return when you had rested properly. I will leave you two to speak." The older woman gathered her supplies and departed, closing the door behind her with what Rosalind could only describe as a knowing look. "Lady Rosalind," Aldrich said, and hearing him speak her name sent a curious thrill through her. "You look much recovered. I am glad. I feared my condition had taken too great a toll on you." "I am well," Rosalind assured him, settling into the chair beside his bed. "And you? How do you feel?" "As if I have been trampled by a war horse and then stabbed for good measure," Aldrich replied with a hint of dry humor. "But alive, which is more than I had any right to expect. Your skills as a healer are extraordinary, my lady. I owe you my life." "You owe your life to your own strength and will to survive," Rosalind countered. "I merely provided the herbs and bandages. The fighting was yours to do." Aldrich's expression grew serious. "I have been thinking during the hours since I woke about what I saw, about you. I know it sounds mad, and I know you have every reason to dismiss it as the ravings of a fevered mind, but I need you to understand that what I experienced felt more real than anything I have ever known, more real than this room, this bed, even this body. And seeing you now, hearing your voice, looking into your eyes, I am more convinced than ever that there is some purpose to it all, some reason our paths have crossed in this way." Rosalind felt her breath catch in her throat as she met Aldrich's intense gaze. There was such conviction in his eyes, such unwavering certainty, that she found it impossible to simply dismiss his words as the product of illness or injury. She had spent enough time with the delirious and fevered to recognize the difference between confusion and genuine belief, and Aldrich spoke with the clarity of a man who knew his own mind completely. "Then tell me more," she said softly, leaning forward slightly in her chair. "Tell me exactly what you saw, what you experienced. If there is truly some purpose to all of this, perhaps understanding your vision will help us discover what it might be." Aldrich's expression softened with gratitude. He shifted slightly against the pillows, wincing at the pull of his healing wound, but his eyes never left her face. "It began on the battlefield," he started, his voice taking on a distant quality as he recalled the memory. "We were outnumbered 3-1, the northern rebels having laid a trap for us at the river crossing. I watched men I had trained with, fought beside for years, fall all around me. The captain of our company was killed in the first charge, and command fell to me. I knew we could not win, that our only hope was retreat, but the rebels had us surrounded on 3 sides with the river at our backs." He paused, his jaw tightening with the weight of the memory. "I ordered my men to fall back, to fight their way to the shallow crossing downstream while I held the center with a small force. We bought them time, precious minutes for the others to escape, but the cost was high. I took wounds, many wounds, but I could not fall, not while my men still needed me. Then a rebel knight, larger than any man I had ever faced, broke through our line. His sword caught me beneath the ribs, drove deep into my chest. I felt the blade pierce something vital, felt the warm rush of blood inside my body." Rosalind's hands clenched in her lap as she listened, imagining the horror of that moment, the pain and terror he must have felt. Yet Aldrich spoke with a strange calmness, as if he had made peace with what had happened. "I should have died there on that muddy field with the screams of battle all around me," he continued. "But something kept me standing, kept me fighting. I killed the rebel knight, drove my sword through his throat even as my own blood poured from my wound. And then I heard it, the sound of hoofbeats receding, my men riding to safety. Only then did I allow myself to fall. The last thing I remember seeing was the gray sky above me, clouds rolling across the heavens like an army on the march. He drew a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a note of wonder. The darkness came quickly, a cold emptiness that swallowed everything. I felt myself drifting, untethered from my body, from the pain, from everything that made me who I was. I thought that was death, that final darkness. But then, slowly, I became aware of light. Not the harsh light of the sun or the warm glow of a fire, but something else entirely. Something pure and eternal, a radiance that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Rosalind found herself holding her breath, completely captivated by his words. Around them, the room seemed to fade away, until there was nothing but his voice and the intensity of the moment they were sharing. I found myself standing in a garden, Aldrich said, his blue eyes distant with memory, the most beautiful garden I have ever seen or could imagine. The grass beneath my feet was impossibly green, soft as silk, and it seemed to glow with its own inner light. Trees rose around me, their trunks silver and their leaves like spun gold, rustling in a breeze I could not feel but could somehow sense. Flowers bloomed everywhere, in colors I had no names for, their fragrances filling the air with sweetness beyond description. And there was music, faint but constant, like voices singing in harmony so perfect it brought tears to my eyes. He focused on her again, and the intensity in his gaze made Rosalind's heart race. And there you were, standing in the center of that garden. You wore a gown of white that seemed woven from moonlight itself, and your hair fell loose around your shoulders, just as I described before. You were so beautiful it hurt to look at you, yet I could not look away. You smiled at me, and in that smile I saw such compassion, such understanding, as if you knew everything I had ever done, every choice I had made, every fear I carried, and accepted it all without judgment. What did I say to you? Rosalind asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You did not speak with words, Aldrich replied, but I heard you nonetheless, felt your message in my very soul. You told me that I had fought well, that I had honored my duty, and saved the lives entrusted to me. You told me that I could rest now, that I had earned my peace, but you also told me that there was another path, if I chose to take it, a path that led back to the world of pain and struggle, a path that would demand more of me than anything I had yet endured. And you told me that if I chose to return, our lives would be bound together in ways I could not yet understand. Tears had begun to slip down Rosalind's cheeks without her even realizing it. And you chose to return, she said. I did, Aldrich confirmed, because when I looked into your eyes in that garden of light, I knew that whatever trials awaited me in the living world, they would be worth enduring if it meant the possibility of truly knowing you, of understanding what connection exists between our souls. You reached out your hand to me, and the moment I moved to take it, everything changed. The garden vanished, the light faded, and I felt myself being pulled back, down through layers of darkness, back into my broken body with all its pain and weakness. And when I finally opened my eyes in this room, the first thing I saw was you, sitting beside my bed just as you had been in that garden, and I knew that what I had experienced was real. The chamber fell into silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sounds of the manor. Rosalind struggled to process everything she had heard, to reconcile it with her understanding of the world and how it worked. She had been raised with faith, had attended services in the chapel, and learned the teachings of the church. But this was something different, something that spoke to mysteries beyond the understanding of priests and scholars. I do not know what to believe, she finally said, wiping the tears from her cheeks. Everything you describe defies explanation, goes against all reason and logic, and yet I cannot deny what I feel when I look at you, this sense that I have known you far longer than a few days, that some part of my soul recognizes some part of yours. From the moment you were brought through our doors, I felt drawn to you in a way I have never experienced before. I could not leave your side, could not bear the thought of you dying alone. And when your heart stopped, when I held you in my arms and felt the life leaving your body, something inside me broke. I begged God, begged any power that might be listening to bring you back. And then you returned, and I felt such overwhelming relief and joy that it frightened me. Aldrich reached out with one hand, extending it toward her, palm up. It was an invitation, not a demand. Rosalind stared at his hand for a long moment, knowing that taking it would mean accepting something profound. acknowledging a connection that could change the course of both their lives. Then, moving almost without conscious thought, she placed her smaller hand in his larger one. The moment their skin touched, Rosalind felt something pass between them, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire burning in the hearth. It was as if a circuit had been completed, as if two halves of something long separated had finally rejoined. Aldrich's fingers closed gently around hers, and they sat there in silence, hands clasped, both feeling the weight and wonder of whatever this was that had brought them together. "I do not understand it," Aldrich said quietly. "I do not know why you appeared to me in that place between life and death, or what it means that I was given the choice to return. But I know that I made the right choice. Being here with you feels more right than anything I have ever known. It is as if my entire life, all the battles I have fought, all the choices I have made, were leading me to this moment, to this room, to you." "My mother used to tell me stories," Rosalind said, her thumb unconsciously tracing small circles on the back of his hand. "She said that before we are born, our souls exist in a place of light and peace, and that sometimes souls make agreements with each other, promises to find one another in the mortal world and fulfill some shared purpose. I was very young when she told me these things, and I thought they were just fairy tales meant to comfort a child. But now, hearing your story, feeling what I feel, I wonder if perhaps there was truth in her words." Before either of them could say more, a sharp knock on the door interrupted the moment. Rosalind reluctantly withdrew her hand from Aldrich's as Martha entered, carrying a tray laden with food. The older woman's eyes swept over the scene before her, taking in Rosalind's tear-stained cheeks and the tender way the two were looking at each other, but she said nothing about it. "Forgive the interruption," Martha said, though her tone suggested she was not particularly sorry. "But the captain needs to eat if he is to regain his strength, and my lady needs nourishment as well. I have brought bread fresh from the oven, a rich broth made with beef and vegetables and some cheese and dried fruit. You will both eat, and you will both rest, and there will be time enough for talking later." Despite the intensity of the moment that had just passed, Rosalind found herself smiling at Martha's motherly bossiness. "You are right, of course, Martha. Thank you." The healer set the tray on the small table beside the bed and began helping Aldrich sit up more fully, propping additional pillows behind his back to support him. He winced at the movement, his hand instinctively going to his bandaged ribs, but he managed to settle into a more upright position. Martha ladled broth into a wooden bowl and handed it to Rosalind along with a spoon. "You feed him, my lady," Martha instructed. "He is still too weak to manage it himself without spilling half of it. And while you are doing that, I will check his wound to ensure it is healing properly." Rosalind took the bowl and spoon, moving her chair closer to the bed. Aldrich watched her with amusement, dancing in his blue eyes as she carefully spooned up some of the rich, fragrant broth and brought it to his lips. He accepted it readily, and Rosalind found herself oddly pleased by the simple act of caring for him in this way. There was an intimacy to it that had nothing to do with romance, and everything to do with trust and tenderness. As she fed him, Martha carefully unwound the bandages around his torso, examining the wound with practiced efficiency. "It is healing remarkably well," she announced with satisfaction. "The inflammation has almost completely subsided, and the flesh is knitting together cleanly. At this rate, you will be up and walking within a fortnight, though it will be considerably longer before you are fit to return to battle. You are a fortunate man, Captain Brennan. I have seen many die from lesser wounds than the one you sustained." "I owe my fortune to your skills and Lady Rosalind's devoted care," Aldrich replied, his eyes never leaving Rosalind's face. "I am in debt to you both." "Nonsense," Martha said briskly as she applied fresh poultices and clean bandages. "We do what we must for those who sacrifice themselves for others. You saved the lives of your men, Captain. That kind of courage and honor deserves to be rewarded with the finest care we can provide." She finished her work and stepped back, surveying her patient with approval. "Now I will leave you two in peace, but I expect to see that entire pot of broth consumed, along with the bread and cheese. Building strength requires fuel, and you have much building to do." After Martha departed, Rosalind continued feeding Aldrich, alternating spoonfuls of broth with small pieces of bread. They spoke little, but the silence between them was comfortable, charged with an awareness of each other that needed no words. When the bowl was finally empty and Aldrich had eaten as much bread and cheese as he could manage, Rosalind set the tray aside and poured them both cups of watered wine. "Tell me about yourself," Aldrich said as he sipped the wine carefully. "I have monopolized our conversation with my strange tale, but I know almost nothing about you beyond your name and your considerable skill as a healer. How did the daughter of a lord come to spend her days tending wounded soldiers?" Rosalind settled back in her chair, cradling her own cup between her hands. "My mother died bringing my younger brother into the world when I was 10 years old," she began. "The baby died as well, and my father was devastated. He withdrew into himself for a time, lost in grief, and I was left largely to my own devices. I spent hours in the manor's library, reading everything I could find, including my mother's collection of herbal remedies and healing texts. She had been something of a healer herself, tending to the servants and villagers when they fell ill." She paused, looking into the ruby depths of her wine as memories washed over her. "I think I started learning about healing as a way to feel close to her, to understand the work she had loved. But I discovered that I had a talent for it, an intuition about which herbs would help and how to treat different ailments. When my father finally emerged from his grief, he found me treating one of the stable boys who had broken his arm. Instead of scolding me for engaging in work beneath my station, he encouraged me. He said my mother would have been proud." Aldrich listened intently to every word, his blue eyes never leaving her face. There was something in his expression that made Rosalind feel truly seen, as if he was not merely hearing her words but understanding the emotions and experiences that lay beneath them. It was a feeling she had rarely experienced, even with her father, and it both comforted and unsettled her. "When the war began 3 years ago," Rosalind continued, "my father offered Thornfield Manor as a sanctuary for wounded soldiers. The king's forces needed places to send men who could not be treated on the battlefield, and father felt it was his duty to help. I was 20 years old then, and I threw myself into the work with everything I had. I learned from the experienced healers who came to help us, studied texts on surgery and the treatment of battle wounds, experimented with different combinations of herbs and poultices. Over time, I became the head healer here, the one who handles the most difficult cases." She met Aldrich's gaze, feeling a blush creep into her cheeks. "But in all that time, with all the hundreds of soldiers I have tended, I have never felt what I feel with you. I have cared for them, grieved for those we lost, celebrated those who recovered. But there was always a distance, a professional separation between healer and patient. With you, that distance does not exist. From the moment I saw you, I felt as if I already knew you, as if some part of me had been waiting for you to arrive." "Perhaps it had been," Aldrich said softly. "Perhaps both our souls had been waiting, preparing for this meeting across all the years that came before. I know it sounds like the romantic nonsense of bards and poets, the kind of tales told around fires to entertain soldiers between battles, but I have never been a man given to flights of fancy, Lady Rosalind. I am a warrior, trained to see the world as it is, to make decisions based on facts and reason. Yet what I experienced, what I feel now, transcends anything reason can explain." Before Rosalind could respond, another knock sounded at the door. This time it was her father who entered, his tall frame filling the doorway. Lord Edmund's keen eyes took in the scene before him, noting the proximity of Rosalind's chair to the bed, the way she and Aldrich were looking at each other, the gentle flush on his daughter's cheeks. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Captain Brennan," Lord Edmund said, approaching the bed with his hand extended. "I am Lord Edmund Merrick, Master of Thornfield Manor. I apologize for not visiting sooner, but I wanted to give you time to recover before imposing upon you. I am glad to see you looking so much improved." Aldrich grasped the offered hand with as much strength as he could muster, meeting Lord Edmund's gaze directly. "The honor is mine, my lord. I owe you and your household a debt I can never fully repay. Your daughter's skill and dedication have given me back my life. My daughter has a gift for healing that surpasses anyone I have ever known," Lord Edmund agreed, pride evident in his voice. "She gets that from her mother, God rest her soul. But tell me, Captain, what news do you bring from the northern front? We hear so little here, only rumors and scattered reports from the soldiers who pass through. How goes the war?" Aldrich's expression grew grave. "Not well, I fear. The northern rebels are stronger and better organized than anyone anticipated. They have the advantage of knowing the terrain, and they have managed to secure alliances with several clans that were previously neutral. The battle at Riverdale was a disaster, A carefully laid trap that cost us nearly 200 men. Had my company not managed to escape, the losses would have been even worse. Lord Edmund settled into a chair near the window, his face lined with concern. And what of the king's strategy? Surely there must be some plan to turn the tide of this conflict. King Edmund is a good and just ruler, but he is not a military strategist, Aldrich replied carefully. He relies too heavily on advisors who have never seen a battlefield, who make decisions based on maps and reports rather than the reality of combat. The generals closest to the fighting have been pleading for reinforcements, for better supply lines, for a coordinated offensive instead of these scattered defensive actions. But their counsel goes largely unheeded. Politics, Lord Edmund said with disgust. Always politics. Men die while lords in comfortable castles argue over precedence and strategy. It has ever been thus, I suppose. Father, Rosalind interjected gently, Captain Brennan needs rest, not to be burdened with discussions of war and politics. He has fought enough battles for now. You are right, daughter. Forgive me, Lord Edmund said, rising from his chair. I came here for another purpose entirely. Captain Brennan, I wanted to extend an invitation to you. When you are recovered enough to leave your bed, I would be honored if you would join me and my daughter for meals in the main hall. You should not have to take your food alone in this chamber like a prisoner, and perhaps when you are stronger still, you might share your insights on warfare and strategy with me. I am merely a lord who manages estates and settles disputes among farmers, but I find the military arts fascinating. I would be honored, Lord Edmund, Aldrich replied sincerely. Your hospitality has already exceeded anything I could have hoped for. To share meals with you and Lady Rosalind would be a privilege. After her father departed, Rosalind remained with Aldrich for another hour, changing his bandages once more and ensuring he was comfortable for the night. As the sun set beyond the windows, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, she found herself reluctant to leave, even though she knew she should. There was something about being in his presence that made her feel more alive, more herself, than she had felt in years. You should go, Aldrich said gently, though his eyes betrayed his own reluctance to see her leave. You need proper rest in your own bed, and I need to sleep if I am to continue healing. But Rosalind, may I ask one thing before you go? It was the first time he had used her given name without her title, and the intimacy of it sent a shiver down her spine. Of course. Will you come back tomorrow? Not as my healer, but simply as yourself? I find that I want to know everything about you, want to understand the woman who appeared to me in that garden of light. If my vision was real, if there truly is some purpose to our meeting, then I want to explore it, to see where this connection between us might lead. Rosalind felt her heart swell with an emotion she was afraid to name. I will come, she promised. Not just tomorrow, but every day until you are well enough to leave this room. And even then, I suspect I will find reasons to seek out your company. Whatever this is between us, Aldrich, I want to understand it as well. That night, Rosalind lay in her own bed, staring at the canopy above her while her mind raced with thoughts of Aldrich and his extraordinary vision. She had always been a practical person, grounded in the tangible world of herbs and bandages, of fevers and wounds that could be seen and treated. But what Aldrich described existed in a realm beyond the physical, beyond anything she could measure or test. Yet she could not dismiss it, not when she felt the truth of it resonating in her own heart. Sleep came late, and when it did, Rosalind dreamed. She found herself walking through a garden much like the one Aldrich had described, though the details were hazy and indistinct. The air was filled with music she could not quite hear, and light seemed to emanate from everywhere at once. She walked among trees with silver trunks and golden leaves, her feet silent on grass that felt like silk. And then she saw him, standing in the center of the garden, whole and healthy, his armor gleaming in the eternal light. Aldrich turned to her with a smile that made her heart ache, and he held out his hand, just as she had supposedly done in his vision. But before she could take it, before she could close the distance between them, she woke to the gray light of dawn filtering through her windows. The dream stayed with her as she dressed and made her way to the eastern chamber, her heart beating faster with each step. She knocked softly and entered to find Aldrich already awake, propped up against his pillows with better color in his face than the day before. His eyes lit up when he saw her, and Rosalind felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. "You came," he said, his voice warm with pleasure. "I promised I would." Rosalind replied, settling into what she had begun to think of as her chair. How do you feel this morning? Stronger, Aldrich answered. The pain is less, and I find I can breathe more deeply without feeling as if my ribs are being crushed. Martha says I may be able to stand and walk a few steps within the next day or two, though she threatens dire consequences if I overdo it. Martha is wise, Rosalind said with a smile. You should heed her warnings. Healing is not a race, Aldrich. Push yourself too hard too soon, and you will set back your recovery. I know, he acknowledged, but I confess I am eager to be out of this bed, to move freely again. I have never been good at being idle. He paused, studying her face with those intense blue eyes. You look tired, Rosalind. Did you not sleep well? I dreamed, she admitted, of a garden much like the one you described. You were there, whole and healthy. You reached out your hand to me, just as I supposedly did in your vision, but I woke before I could take it. Aldrich's expression grew serious. Do you think it means something? That you would dream of the same place I saw? I do not know what to think, Rosalind confessed. Part of me wants to believe that it is all connected, that there is some deeper meaning to everything that has happened. But another part of me, the practical part trained in healing and science, insists that dreams are merely the mind's way of processing thoughts and experiences from waking life. I spent all evening thinking about your vision, so naturally my sleeping mind would conjure images related to it. Perhaps, Aldrich conceded, or perhaps your dream is confirmation that what I experienced was real, that there truly is some connection between our souls that transcends the boundaries of the physical world. He reached out his hand to her, just as he had the day before, and once again Rosalind placed her hand in his without hesitation. I find that I do not need all the answers right now. It is enough to be here with you, to feel this connection growing stronger with each moment we spend together. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands clasped, each lost in their own thoughts, yet somehow sharing the quiet moment. Outside the window, Rosalind could hear the sounds of the manor coming to life, servants going about their duties, horses being led to the stables, the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer. The world continued on as it always had, yet for her, everything had changed. Tell me about your family, Rosalind said eventually. You mentioned you are the youngest of 3 sons. What are your brothers like? Aldrich's expression softened with affection. My eldest brother, Robert, named for our father, is everything a firstborn should be. Responsible, serious, dedicated to learning the management of our family's estate so he can take over when father grows too old. He married young to a woman our parents chose for him, and they have 4 children already. He is a good man, if somewhat predictable. And your middle brother? Rosalind prompted. Geoffrey, Aldrich said with a smile. Geoffrey is the scholar of the family. From the time he was a boy, he had his nose buried in books, learning languages, studying history and philosophy. When he came of age, he entered the service of the church, though not as a simple priest. He works in the archives at Canterbury, preserving and translating ancient texts. I have not seen him in nearly 5 years, but we exchange letters when we can. His last one was full of excitement about some manuscript he had discovered, written in a language so old that only a handful of scholars in all of England can read it. That leaves you, Rosalind observed, the youngest son who chose the path of a warrior. I had little choice in the matter, Aldrich explained. As the 3rd son, I would inherit almost nothing, a small parcel of land perhaps, or a modest income, but nothing that would allow me to live as a lord in my own right. I could have followed Geoffrey into the church, but I had no calling for that life. Or I could have remained at home, becoming my eldest brother's steward or advisor, forever living in his shadow. Neither option appealed to me. He shifted slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound, but continued speaking. So at 15 I convinced my father to allow me to train as a knight. I was sent to serve as a squire to Sir Marcus of Pembroke, a renowned warrior who taught me everything about swordplay, horsemanship, and the code of chivalry. I earned my knighthood at 19 after distinguishing myself in a tournament, and I have spent the years since then in service to King Edmund, fighting his battles and protecting his realm. Do you regret it? Rosalind asked. The choice you made? The life of constant warfare and danger? Aldrich considered the question seriously. There are moments when I regret the things I have seen, the lives I have taken, the friends I have watched die. War is not glorious, Rosalind, no matter what the songs and stories claim. It is brutal and ugly and filled with suffering, But I do not regret choosing this path, because it has made me who I am. Every battle I have fought, every decision I have made, every man I have saved or failed to save, has shaped me. And all of it, every step of the journey, has led me here, to this room, to you. How could I regret that? The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both natural and extraordinary. Each morning, Rosalind would wake with the dawn, dress in one of her finest gowns, deep blues and rich greens trimmed with fur and embroidered with silver thread, and make her way to Aldrich's chamber. She told herself it was her duty as his healer to check on his progress, to change his bandages and ensure the wound was healing properly. But in truth, she went because she could not stay away, because every hour spent apart from him felt like time wasted. Aldrich's recovery progressed remarkably well. By the end of the first week, he was able to sit up without assistance and take short walks around the chamber, leaning on Rosalind's arm for support. His strength returned gradually but steadily, the color fully restored to his face, the sharpness returning to his eyes. Martha marveled at his progress, declaring that she had never seen a man recover so quickly from such a grievous wound. She credited Rosalind's exceptional care, but both Rosalind and Aldrich knew there was something else at work, some force that neither of them fully understood, but both felt deeply. They spent hours talking, sharing stories of their lives, their dreams, their fears. Aldrich told her about his experiences in battle, about the brothers in arms he had lost, about the weight of command and the impossible choices war forced upon a man. He spoke of the beauty he had found even in the darkest moments, a sunrise over a battlefield, the loyalty of soldiers who would die for each other, the profound bond that formed between men who had faced death together. Rosalind, in turn, shared her own experiences. She told him about the wounded soldiers she had saved and those she had lost, about the heartbreak of watching young men die far from home, calling out for mothers and sweethearts who would never see them again. She spoke of her loneliness, the isolation that came from being an unmarried woman of 23, in a world that expected her to have wed and borne children by now. She confessed that her father had received several offers for her hand over the years, from lords and knights seeking to align themselves with the Merrick family, but she had refused them all. Why? Aldrich asked one afternoon as they sat together by the window, watching snow begin to fall over the gardens. He had progressed enough to sit in a proper chair, dressed in a loose linen shirt and breeches that one of the servants had found for him. The shirt was open at the collar, revealing the edge of his bandages and the strong column of his throat. Why refuse them all? Surely some of those men were worthy suitors. Rosalind was quiet for a moment, watching the snowflakes drift past the window like fragments of cloud. Because none of them saw me, she finally said. They saw Lord Edmund's daughter. They saw the Merrick estates and the alliance such a marriage would bring. Some of them saw a pretty face and a suitable womb for bearing heirs, but none of them saw Rosalind, the woman who reads medical texts by candlelight and gets blood on her gowns, and would rather spend her days in the healing ward than at court. None of them wanted to know what I thought, what I dreamed about, what made my heart sing or my soul weep. She turned to look at him, finding his blue eyes already fixed on her with that intensity that never failed to make her breath catch. I told myself I would rather live unmarried and alone than bind myself to a man who could not see the whole of me. My father understood, thank God. He never pressured me to accept any of those offers, never made me feel as if I was failing in my duty by refusing them. He said my mother would have wanted me to marry for love, not convenience, and that he would rather have me happy and unwed than miserable in a marriage of obligation. Aldrich reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm in a gesture that had become familiar between them. You deserve to be seen, he said quietly. You deserve to be known and valued for everything you are. Your intelligence, your compassion, your strength, your dedication. Any man who could not recognize those qualities is a fool not worthy of your consideration. And you? Rosalind asked, her heart pounding. Do you see me, Aldrich? I see you, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. God help me, Rosalind. I see you so clearly it terrifies me. I see your brilliance and your kindness, your courage and your tenderness. I see the way you care for the wounded without regard for your own comfort, the way you fight for every life as if it were your own. I see the sadness in your eyes when you speak of your mother, the love you bear for your father, the loneliness you have carried for so long. And I see the beauty that goes far deeper than your face, Though God knows you are the most beautiful woman I have ever beheld. I see all of it, and I am undone by it. Rosalind felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her this way, with such raw honesty and vulnerability. I see you too, she whispered. I see the warrior who would die for his men, the man who carries the weight of every life lost under his command. I see your honor and your strength, your intelligence and your compassion. I see the wounds you carry inside, the ones that do not show on your body but run just as deep. And I see the connection between us, this inexplicable bond that has grown stronger with every day that passes. Aldrich stood slowly, mindful of his healing wound, and drew Rosalind to her feet. They stood facing each other, hands clasped between them, the snow falling steadily outside the window, creating a cocoon of white silence around the manor. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension, with unspoken words and unfulfilled longing. "Rosalind," Aldrich said, his voice rough, "I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I am a third son with no lands or fortune to my name, a soldier who may be called back to war at any moment. I have nothing to offer you but myself, and even that is damaged, scarred by years of battle and loss. But I must know, is there a chance that you could feel for me even a fraction of what I feel for you? Because if there is even the smallest possibility, then I want to pursue it. I want to see where this connection leads us, wherever that may be." Before Rosalind could answer, the door to the chamber burst open and Martha rushed in, her face flushed with urgency. "My lady, you are needed in the main hall immediately. A messenger has arrived from the king with urgent news, and your father requests your presence." Rosalind felt frustration surge through her at the interruption, but she could see from Martha's expression that the matter was serious. "I will come at once," she said, then turned back to Aldrich. "We will continue this conversation later. I promise." "I will hold you to that promise," Aldrich replied, though his eyes were troubled. Rosalind hurried through the corridors of Thornfield Manor, her heart still racing from the conversation with Aldrich, her mind struggling to shift focus to whatever crisis had brought a royal messenger to their door. She found her father in the main hall, standing before a young man wearing the king's livery, his cloak still dusted with snow from his journey. Several of the senior household staff were gathered as well, their faces grave. "Ah, Rosalind," Lord Edmund said as she entered. "This messenger brings troubling news from the capital. It seems the northern rebels have grown bolder. They have begun attacking settlements closer to the heart of the kingdom, and there are reports that they may be planning a major offensive in the spring. The king is calling for all able-bodied knights and soldiers to report for duty within the month." Rosalind's blood ran cold. She knew what this meant without having to ask. Aldrich, once he was fully recovered, would be expected to return to the king's service, to ride back into battle and face death once again. The thought of it made her feel physically ill, as if someone had struck her in the stomach. "My lord," the messenger continued, his voice formal and precise, "His Majesty also requests that all estates serving as healing sanctuaries prepare for an influx of wounded. He anticipates heavy casualties in the coming months and needs to know that there will be places to send the injured." Lord Edmund nodded gravely. "Tell His Majesty that Thornfield Manor stands ready to serve, as we always have. We will make preparations to receive as many wounded as we can accommodate." After the messenger had been given food and shown to a chamber where he could rest before continuing his journey, Lord Edmund drew Rosalind aside into his private study. The room was lined with shelves bearing leather-bound books and scrolls, a fire crackling in the hearth to ward off the winter chill. Her father poured them both cups of warmed wine and gestured for her to sit. "I see the way you look at him," Lord Edmund said without preamble. "The way you look at Captain Brennan, and I see the way he looks at you. What has developed between you two, daughter?" Rosalind felt a blush creeping up her neck. "I do not know how to name it, father. It is more than simple attraction, more than the natural compassion between healer and patient. There is a connection between us that I cannot explain, that defies all logic and reason. He claims to have seen me in a vision when he was dying, in some realm beyond this world, and that I gave him the choice to return to life. And I believe him, father. God help me. I believe every word." Lord Edmund was quiet for a long moment, sipping his wine and studying his daughter's face. "Your mother told me something similar on the night before our wedding," he finally said. "She said that she had dreamed of me years before we met, that when she finally saw me at that feast where her father introduced us, she knew immediately that I was the man from her dreams. I thought it was romantic fancy at the time, the kind of thing young women tell themselves to make arranged marriages more palatable. But as the years passed, as our love grew deeper and stronger, I came to believe that perhaps there was truth in what she said. Perhaps some souls are indeed meant to find each other. He set down his cup and leaned forward, his green eyes, so like Rosalind's own, fixed on her with fatherly concern. But you must understand what you are contemplating, daughter. Aldrich Brennan is a warrior, and this war shows no signs of ending. If you give your heart to him, you must accept that you may lose him to battle. You must accept that every time he rides away, it may be the last time you see him alive. Can you bear that? Can you live with that fear every day? Rosalind met her father's gaze steadily. I have already lost him once, when his heart stopped and he lay dead in my arms. I felt what it was like to have him torn from me, and it was the most painful thing I have ever experienced. But he came back, Father. Against all odds, against all reason, he came back, and I cannot turn away from what we have found together, no matter how much fear the future may hold. I would rather have whatever time we can steal together than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. Lord Edmund smiled, though his eyes were sad. You have your mother's courage, Rosalind. She would be proud of you. He paused, then added, I will not stand in your way. If you and Captain Brennan wish to pursue this connection between you, you have my blessing. But be careful, daughter. Guard your heart even as you give it away. The world is cruel, especially to those who dare to love in times of war. Rosalind returned to Aldrich's chamber to find him standing by the window, staring out at the falling snow with a troubled expression. He turned when he heard her enter, and she could see the knowledge in his eyes before she even spoke. You heard, she said. Servants talk, Aldrich replied. Word spreads quickly in a manner like this. The king is calling his soldiers back to war. He crossed to her, his movements still somewhat stiff but growing stronger each day. Rosalind, I must tell you something. When I am well enough, when I can ride and fight again, I will have to answer that call. It is my duty, my honor as a knight. I cannot turn away from it, no matter how much I might wish to. I know, Rosalind said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I have always known that you would have to return to the war eventually. But Aldrich, we have time still. You are not yet fully healed and winter has set in hard. No armies will march until spring at the earliest. That gives us months, precious months to explore what exists between us. Aldrich cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. And what then? When spring comes and I must ride away, what happens to us? I cannot ask you to wait for me, cannot ask you to live in constant fear that I will not return. That would be cruel beyond measure. You are not asking, Rosalind replied, covering his hands with her own. I am choosing. I choose to wait, to hope, to believe that you will come back to me just as you came back from death itself. I choose whatever time we can have together, however brief or uncertain it may be. I choose you, Aldrich Brennan, with all the complications and fears that choice entails. Something broke in Aldrich's expression, the careful control he had been maintaining shattering like glass. He pulled Rosalind into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest, mindful of his healing wound, but unable to resist the need to feel her close. Rosalind wrapped her arms around him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek, and she knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. I do not deserve you, Aldrich whispered into her hair, but I am too selfish to let you go. They stood there in the fading afternoon light, holding each other as snow continued to fall outside, two souls who had found each other against impossible odds and were determined to forge whatever future they could from the time they had been given. The winter deepened over Thornfield Manor, blanketing the Yorkshire countryside in layers of pristine white snow. The cold was bitter and unrelenting, keeping the world frozen in a state of beautiful stillness. For Rosalind and Aldrich, the harsh weather was a blessing in disguise, a guarantee that no armies would march and no battles would be fought until the spring thaw. It gave them time, precious time, to nurture the extraordinary connection that had blossomed between them. Aldrich's recovery continued at a pace that astounded everyone. By the third week, he was walking the corridors of the manor without assistance, his wound healing into a raised pink scar that would forever mark where death had nearly claimed him. Martha declared him well enough to leave his chamber permanently, and Lord Edmund arranged for him to be given proper quarters in the western wing, a spacious room befitting a knight of his reputation. True to his word, Lord Edmund invited Aldrich to dine with them in the main hall each evening. These meals became the highlight of Rosalind's days, opportunities to sit across from Aldrich at the long oak table, to watch candlelight play across his strong features, to listen to him discuss strategy and warfare with her father, while occasionally catching his eye and sharing a private smile that made her heart race. The other wounded soldiers who were recovering at Thornfield quickly developed a deep respect for Aldrich. Word had spread of his heroism at Riverdale, of how he had held the line alone to save his men, and the younger soldiers looked at him with something approaching awe. Aldrich spent time with them when he could, sharing his knowledge of combat and tactics, offering encouragement to those struggling with their injuries, and listening with genuine compassion to their fears and concerns about returning to battle. Rosalind watched him interact with the other soldiers and felt her love for him growing deeper with each passing day. Yes, she acknowledged to herself one snowy afternoon as she watched him help a young soldier practice walking with a crutch. She loved him. It was no longer a question or a possibility, but a simple fact, as real and undeniable as the ground beneath her feet. She loved Aldrich Brennan with an intensity that both terrified and exhilarated her. As January gave way to February, Rosalind and Aldrich found ways to steal moments alone together. They would walk in the snow-covered gardens, their breath misting in the cold air as they talked about everything and nothing. They would sit together in the manor's library, Rosalind reading aloud from her favorite text while Aldrich listened with his eyes closed, his hand resting over hers. They would stand at the windows overlooking the frozen countryside, watching the sun set in spectacular displays of orange and pink and gold, and Aldrich would wrap his arms around her from behind, holding her close while they shared a silence more intimate than words. One evening, as they stood thus at the window in Aldrich's chamber, he spoke words that Rosalind had been both longing and fearing to hear. "I love you, Rosalind Merrick. I think I have loved you from the moment I opened my eyes in that healing chamber and saw you sitting beside my bed. No, before that. I think I loved you when I saw you in that garden of light, when some part of my soul recognized some part of yours and knew that I had found what I had been searching for my entire life without even knowing I was searching." Rosalind turned in his arms to face him, her green eyes shining with tears. "I love you too, Aldrich, so much that it frightens me. I have never felt anything like this before. Never knew it was possible to love someone with such completeness, such certainty. When I am with you, I feel whole in a way I never have before. And when we are apart, even for a few hours, I feel as if some essential part of me is missing." Aldrich cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away the tears that had begun to slip down her cheeks. "Marry me, Rosalind. I know I have nothing to offer you but myself, no lands or fortune or grand estate. I know that I will have to return to war when spring comes, that I cannot promise you safety or certainty, or even that I will survive the battles ahead. But I can promise you my love, my devotion, my absolute faithfulness for whatever time we are given. Marry me, and let us face the future together, whatever it may bring." Rosalind's heart felt as if it might burst from her chest. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Aldrich, I will marry you. I want nothing more than to be your wife, to bind my life to yours for whatever time God grants us." Aldrich kissed her then, a kiss that was tender and passionate and full of promise. It was their first kiss, and Rosalind felt as if the world had shifted on its axis, as if everything that had come before this moment had been leading to it. When they finally drew apart, both breathless and flushed, Aldrich rested his forehead against hers. "We should speak to your father," he said. "I should ask him properly for your hand. Do this with all the honor and respect you deserve." "Tomorrow," Rosalind agreed. "Tonight, let this moment be just ours." They stood together as darkness fell over the manor, holding each other close. Two souls who had found each other across the boundaries of life and death, and were determined to forge a future together despite all the uncertainties that lay ahead. The next morning, Aldrich requested a private audience with Lord Edmund. Rosalind waited anxiously in the library, pretending to read a medical text, but unable to focus on the words before her. She trusted her father to give his blessing, but still her nerves made her hands tremble as she turned pages without seeing them. When Aldrich finally found her, his face was alight with joy. He said yes. Aldrich announced, sweeping her up in his arms and spinning her around despite the protest of his still-healing ribs. "Your father has given his blessing for us to wed. He said he has never seen you happier than you have been these past weeks, and that is all the proof he needs that this is the right path." Rosalind laughed with delight, her arms wrapped around Aldrich's neck. "When?" she asked breathlessly. "When can we marry?" "Your father suggested we wait until after the spring planting," Aldrich said, setting her down gently, but keeping his arms around her waist. "He wants to hold a proper wedding, to invite the neighboring lords and celebrate with all due ceremony. But Rosalind, I do not want to wait that long. Every day without you as my wife feels like time stolen from us. What if we married sooner, in a simpler ceremony? We could still have the grand celebration your father envisions later, but we would already be bound together, already truly husband and wife." Rosalind considered this, her practical nature warring with her desire to be Aldrich's wife as soon as possible. "The church requires banns to be posted for 3 weeks before a wedding," she said. "But perhaps father could arrange for a special dispensation given the circumstances of war. Let me speak with him." Lord Edmund, when approached, proved more than willing to accommodate their wishes. "I understand the urgency," he said with a knowing smile. "War makes fools of us all when it comes to careful planning. I will speak with the bishop and see what can be arranged. If he agrees to waive the bans, you could be married within a fortnight." The bishop, an old friend of Lord Edmund's family, proved sympathetic to their situation. He agreed to perform a private ceremony in the manor's chapel, with only close family and a few witnesses present. The grand celebration could wait for peacetime, he said, but love should not have to wait when every day might be precious. The 2 weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Rosalind worked with the manor's seamstresses to create a wedding gown, choosing fabric of deep blue velvet, the color of midnight, trimmed with white fur at the collar and cuffs, and embroidered with silver thread in intricate patterns of stars and snowflakes. The seamstresses fashioned a matching cloak lined with white silk, warm enough for the winter cold yet beautiful enough for a bride. Aldrich, with Lord Edmund's assistance, commissioned a blacksmith to craft 2 simple gold rings, inscribed on the inside with their initials and the date of their wedding. He also wrote to his family, informing them of his survival and his impending marriage, though he knew the letters would likely not reach them before the ceremony took place. On the morning of their wedding day, Rosalind woke to find the world transformed. During the night, fresh snow had fallen, covering everything in a blanket of pristine white that sparkled like diamonds in the early morning sun. She took it as a blessing, a sign that the heavens themselves were celebrating this union. Claire helped her dress with trembling hands, the young maidservant crying tears of joy as she fastened the dozens of tiny buttons that ran down the back of the velvet gown. Martha arrived with a circlet of evergreen and white winter roses, which they placed on Rosalind's unbound hair. The dark auburn waves fell past her shoulders like a river of fire against the deep blue of her gown, and when Rosalind looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the radiant woman staring back at her. Her father came to escort her to the chapel, and when he saw her, his eyes filled with tears. "You look so much like your mother on our wedding day," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She would be so proud of you, Rosalind, so proud of the woman you have become, and so happy that you have found a love like ours. I wish she could be here," Rosalind whispered, fighting her own tears. "She is here," Lord Edmund assured her, touching a hand to his heart. "She is always here, in both of us, and I believe she is watching over you now, blessing this union just as I do." The chapel was small and intimate, lit by dozens of candles that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. Evergreen boughs decorated with white ribbons had been draped along the pews, filling the air with their fresh, clean scent. A few of the household staff were present as witnesses, along with Martha and some of the recovering soldiers who had become Aldrich's friends. But Rosalind saw none of them. From the moment she entered the chapel on her father's arm, her eyes were fixed on Aldrich, who stood waiting at the altar with the bishop. He wore a tunic of deep green wool embroidered with gold thread, a leather belt with a finely wrought buckle, and a cloak of heavy black wool lined with fur. His dark hair had been freshly trimmed, his jaw clean-shaven, and his blue eyes shone with such love and joy that Rosalind felt her breath catch in her throat. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of sacred words and solemn vows. Rosalind heard herself promising to love and honor Aldrich for all her days, heard him make the same promises to her. his voice strong and clear and full of conviction. The bishop blessed their union and pronounced them husband and wife. And then Aldrich was kissing her, his hands gentle on her face, his lips warm and sure against hers, and Rosalind knew that whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them together. The small gathering moved to the main hall for a wedding feast, simple by noble standards but rich with joy and celebration. There was roasted venison and fresh bread, winter vegetables prepared with herbs, honey cakes and sweetmeats, and wine that flowed freely. Toasts were offered to the bride and groom, wishes for their happiness and prosperity, prayers for Aldrich's safety when he returned to war. As the evening wore on and the guests gradually departed to their own chambers, Rosalind and Aldrich found themselves alone in the hall, the fire burning low in the great hearth, the candles guttering in their holders. Aldrich took his wife's hand and led her from the hall, through the corridors of the manor, to the chambers that had been prepared for them in the western wing. The room was warm and welcoming, a fire crackling in the hearth, candles casting a soft golden glow over the carved oak furniture, and the large bed dressed in furs and fine linens. Someone had scattered rose petals across the pillows and left a carafe of wine with 2 cups on the table beside the bed. Aldrich closed the door behind them and turned to face Rosalind, his expression tender and full of wonder. "My wife," he said softly, as if testing the words. "Rosalind Brennan. How strange and wonderful that sounds." "Strange and wonderful indeed," Rosalind agreed, moving into his arms, as naturally as breathing. "I am yours now, Aldrich, completely and irrevocably yours, for whatever time we are given." "And I am yours," he replied, holding her close, "in this life and whatever may come after. You saved me, Rosalind. You called me back from death itself, and now you have given me a reason to fight, to survive whatever battles await me. I will come back to you, I swear it. No matter what I must endure, I will find my way back to you." They made love that night with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless, exploring each other with reverent hands and whispered words of love. And afterward, as they lay tangled together in the great bed, Rosalind's head resting on Aldrich's chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart, she felt a peace and contentment she had never known before. The weeks following their wedding were the happiest of Rosalind's life. She and Aldrich existed in a blissful cocoon, stealing every moment they could together while winter still held the world in its icy grip. They would wake tangled in each other's arms, make love in the early morning light that filtered through the frost-covered windows, then reluctantly rise to face their duties for the day. Rosalind continued her work in the healing ward, tending to the wounded soldiers with her usual dedication, though now she did so with a lightness in her step and a glow in her eyes that made even the most hardened warriors smile. Aldrich spent his days training, rebuilding the strength and endurance he had lost during his recovery. He worked with the blacksmith to repair his armor and sharpen his sword, preparing himself for the inevitable return to battle even as he cherished every peaceful moment. In the evenings, they would dine with Lord Edmund, the 3 of them sharing stories and laughter around the table. Rosalind's father had grown genuinely fond of Aldrich, respecting his intelligence and honor, appreciating the way he made his daughter so radiantly happy. Sometimes, watching the 2 of them together, Lord Edmund would get a faraway look in his eyes, and Rosalind knew he was remembering her mother, remembering his own great love. But as February gave way to March, the world began to change. The snow started to melt, revealing the brown earth beneath. Icicles dripped from the eaves of the manor, creating tiny rivers that ran through the gardens. Birds that had been silent all winter began to sing again, and the first brave shoots of spring flowers pushed through the softening ground. It was beautiful, this awakening of the world, but for Rosalind and Aldrich, each sign of spring's approach brought with it a growing sense of dread. The message came on a gray morning in mid-March, delivered by another royal messenger whose horse was lathered with sweat from hard riding. Rosalind knew what it said before her father even broke the seal, could see the truth written in the messenger's grim expression and the urgency of his arrival. King Edmund was mustering his forces for a major offensive against the northern rebels. All knights and able-bodied soldiers were commanded to report to the royal encampment at York within 3 weeks. The spring campaign was beginning, and the king intended to crush the rebellion once and for all, whatever the cost. Aldrich received the news with the stoic acceptance of a soldier who had always known this day would come. He stood in Lord Edmund's study, Reading the official summons with an expression that revealed nothing of the turmoil Rosalind knew must be churning inside him. When he finally looked up from the parchment, his blue eyes found hers across the room, and in that moment she saw his heart breaking just as surely as her own was. "I must go," he said simply. "I have no choice. My duty, my honor, everything I am, demands that I answer this call." "I know," Rosalind whispered, though the words felt like shards of glass in her throat. "I have always known you would have to leave, but knowing it and facing it are two very different things." That night, lying in their bed with Aldrich's arms around her, Rosalind allowed herself to weep. She cried for the unfairness of having found such perfect love only to have it threatened by war, cried for all the moments they would lose while he was away, cried for the terrifying possibility that he might never return. Aldrich held her close, his own tears falling silently into her hair, and together they grieved for the life they wanted but could not yet have. The 3 weeks passed far too quickly. Aldrich spent his days in intensive preparation, ensuring his armor was in perfect condition, his weapons sharp and balanced, his horse ready for the rigors of campaign. He met with the other soldiers who would be departing with him, forming the small company of men from Thornfield who would ride together to join the king's army. Rosalind watched him transform before her eyes, the peaceful man who had shared her bed becoming once again the warrior he had been before Riverdale. And it broke her heart even as she understood its necessity. She threw herself into preparing supplies for him. Dried meat and hard cheese that would not spoil on the march, medicinal herbs carefully wrapped and labeled, clean bandages, and a small kit of needles and thread for stitching wounds. She packed everything into saddlebags with hands that trembled no matter how hard she tried to steady them. On their last night together, neither of them slept. They made love with a desperate intensity, as if they could somehow memorize each other through touch alone, could burn the sensation of skin against skin so deeply into their memories that time and distance could never erase it. Afterward, they lay awake talking until dawn, sharing every thought and feeling, making promises and plans for a future they both hoped would come. "When I return," Aldrich said, his voice rough with emotion as the first light of morning began to creep through their window, "we will have that grand wedding your father wanted. We will invite all the neighboring lords and celebrate properly. And then I will take you to meet my family, introduce you to my father and brothers." "They will love you, Rosalind. How could they not?" "When you return," Rosalind echoed, clinging to those words like a lifeline. "Not if. When." "When," Aldrich confirmed fiercely. "I swear to you, Rosalind, I will come back. I survived Riverdale, survived a wound that should have killed me, because I was meant to find you. That same fate will protect me now. I will fight with everything I have, and I will survive, and I will come home to you." The dawn broke cold and clear, a perfect spring morning that seemed to mock the sorrow in Rosalind's heart. She dressed carefully in a gown of deep burgundy wool, wanting Aldrich's last image of her to be beautiful. She braided her hair and pinned it in the elaborate style he loved, then went down to the courtyard where the departing soldiers were gathering. Horses stamped and snorted in the crisp morning air, their breath misting. Men embraced their families, kissed their sweethearts, made final farewells. Aldrich's horse, a powerful gray destrier that Lord Edmund had given him as a wedding gift, stood ready with armor and supplies packed carefully on its back. Lord Edmund approached Aldrich, clasping his hand firmly. "Take care of yourself, son," he said, and Rosalind's heart swelled at hearing her father use that word. "Fight bravely and honorably as I know you will, but remember that you have someone waiting for you here. Do not take unnecessary risks. Come home to my daughter." "I will, my lord," Aldrich promised. "You have my word." Then Aldrich turned to Rosalind, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other, trying to memorize every detail, every line and shadow. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she did not care, because breathing seemed far less important than being as close to him as possible for these final moments. "I love you," Aldrich whispered against her hair. "More than life itself, more than honor or glory or anything this world can offer. You are my heart, Rosalind, my soul, my everything, and I will come back to you. I swear it on everything I hold sacred." "I love you too," Rosalind replied, her voice breaking. "Come back to me, Aldrich. No matter what happens, no matter what you must endure, find your way back to me. I will be here waiting, every day, watching for your return." They kissed one final time, a kiss that held all their love and fear and desperate hope. Then Aldrich gently disentangled himself from her embrace, mounted his horse with the fluid grace of a born warrior, and looked down at her one last time. His blue eyes were bright with unshed tears, but his jaw was set with determination. "Until we meet again, my love," he said. "Until we meet again," Rosalind echoed. Then Aldrich turned his horse toward the gates, raised his hand in final farewell, and rode out of Thornfield Manor with his small company behind him. Rosalind stood watching until they disappeared from view, until the sound of hoofbeats faded into silence, until there was nothing left but the empty road and the ache in her chest where her heart used to be. Lord Edmund came to stand beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "He will return, daughter. I feel it in my bones. That young man has too much to live for to let himself fall in battle." Rosalind nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She turned and walked back into the manor, back to the chamber she had shared with Aldrich, and finally allowed herself to collapse on their bed and weep until she had no tears left to shed. The weeks that followed were the longest of Rosalind's life. She threw herself into her work with renewed intensity, caring for the wounded soldiers with almost manic dedication. New wounded arrived regularly as the spring campaign progressed, bringing with them news from the front. The fighting was brutal, they said. The northern rebels were well entrenched and fighting with the desperation of men who knew they would be executed if captured. Casualties on both sides were mounting. Rosalind listened to every report, asked careful questions about which companies had seen the worst fighting, whether anyone had news of Captain Aldrich Brennan. Some men knew of him, spoke of seeing him leading charges or rallying troops in the thick of battle. Others had no information. Each day without word was agony. Each night an exercise in trying not to imagine the worst. She wrote letters to Aldrich, knowing they might never reach him, but needing to put her feelings into words nonetheless. She poured out her heart onto parchment, telling him about her days, about the patients she was treating, about how much she missed him and loved him. She sealed each letter carefully and gave them to messengers heading north, hoping against hope that they would find their way to her husband. Spring turned to early summer. The gardens of Thornfield bloomed in riots of color, flowers opening their faces to the warm sun. But Rosalind barely noticed. She moved through her days in a fog of worry and longing, going through the motions of her duties while her thoughts remained constantly with Aldrich. Then, on a hot afternoon in late June, a wounded soldier was brought to Thornfield who had served in Aldrich's company. Rosalind rushed to his bedside the moment she heard, her heart pounding with hope and fear. The man, a young soldier named Peter with a badly infected leg wound, looked up at her with fevered eyes. "Lady Brennan," he said weakly, "I know you. The captain spoke of you often, showed us the letters you sent, though he never let anyone read them. Said they were too precious to share." "You know my husband?" Rosalind asked urgently, kneeling beside his cot. "You have seen him recently? Is he well?" Peter's expression grew troubled. "I saw him 2 weeks ago, my lady. There was a great battle at the crossing of the River Swale. The rebels had fortified the far bank, and we had to take it to advance. Captain Brennan led the charge, fought like a demon he did. We took the crossing, but the cost was terrible. I was wounded in that fight and sent back here, but before I left, I saw the captain. He was alive, my lady, alive and still fighting, but he had taken wounds. I do not know how serious they were." Rosalind felt her blood run cold. "What kind of wounds? Where was he hurt?" "An arrow to the shoulder, I think," Peter said, his voice growing weaker as fever claimed him. "Maybe to the arm as well. I could not see clearly through all the blood and chaos. But he was standing, my lady. He was standing and giving orders, so it could not have been too grave. That is all I know. I am sorry I cannot tell you more." "You have told me enough," Rosalind said, though her hands were shaking as she began treating his wound. "Rest now, and let me tend to this infection. You have done your duty and more." As she worked to save Peter's leg, Rosalind's mind raced with worry. Arrow wounds could be deceptive, seeming minor only to fester and kill days later. And Aldrich had already come so close to death once. What if his luck had finally run out? What if even now he lay dying in some field hospital, calling her name? That night, Rosalind knelt in the manor's chapel and prayed harder than she had ever prayed in her life. She begged God to protect her husband, to keep him safe, to bring him home to her. She promised anything, everything, If only Aldrich would survive. The next morning brought another messenger, this one bearing official dispatches from the king. Lord Edmund called Rosalind to his study to hear the news, his face grave. The battle at the River Swale had been a costly victory for the king's forces. The rebels had been driven back, but hundreds of men had fallen, and among the wounded being transported south was Captain Aldrich Brennan. Rosalind's heart nearly stopped. "He is alive?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Alive," Lord Edmund confirmed, "but seriously wounded. The dispatch says he took multiple arrows and a sword cut. They are bringing him here to Thornfield, where they know he will receive the best care. They should arrive within 3 days." The 3 days that followed were the longest of Rosalind's life. She prepared the eastern chamber where Aldrich had first recovered, the room that had witnessed their initial meeting and the beginning of their extraordinary connection. She laid out her finest herbs and healing supplies, ensured clean bandages were stacked and ready, had servants keep a constant supply of hot water available. Every detail had to be perfect, because this time it was not just any wounded soldier she would be treating. It was her husband, the man she loved more than life itself. Martha watched Rosalind's frantic preparations with concern. "My lady, you must rest and eat," the older healer urged. "You will be no good to the captain if you collapse from exhaustion the moment he arrives." "I cannot rest," Rosalind replied, her hands never stopping their work of organizing supplies. "Not until I know he is safe, that he is here where I can care for him." "Martha, what if the wounds are worse than the dispatch indicated? What if infection has already set in during the journey? What if I lose him?" "You will not lose him," Martha said firmly, taking Rosalind's trembling hands in her own weathered ones. "That man survived a mortal wound once before because of you. He will survive again. You must have faith, child. Faith in your skills, faith in his strength, and faith in whatever power brought you two together in the first place." On the afternoon of the 3rd day, a cry went up from the watchtower. "Riders approaching. Wounded soldiers from the north." Rosalind ran to the courtyard, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She watched as a small group of horsemen appeared on the road, moving slowly to accommodate a wagon that trundled behind them. The wagon carried wounded men, and even from a distance, Rosalind could see the blood-stained bandages and pale faces. The wagon rolled through the gates and came to a stop in the courtyard. Servants and healers rushed forward to help the wounded men down, to assess their injuries and determine who needed the most urgent care. Rosalind's eyes frantically searched the faces until she found him. Aldrich sat propped against the side of the wagon, his armor removed and his torso wrapped in bandages that were stained dark with old blood. His face was gray with pain and exhaustion, his left arm bound in a sling, and she could see the shaft of an arrow still protruding from his right shoulder. But his eyes were open, and when they found hers across the courtyard, they lit with recognition and relief. "Rosalind," he said, his voice weak but clear. She was at his side in an instant, her hands gentle as they assessed his condition, even as tears streamed down her face. "I am here, my love. I am here. Let me help you down, and we will get you inside where I can properly tend to these wounds." With the help of 2 strong servants, they carefully moved Aldrich from the wagon and carried him to the eastern chamber. Rosalind walked beside them every step of the way, her hand clasped in Aldrich's good one, her eyes never leaving his face. Once they had him settled on the bed, she dismissed everyone except Martha and began the careful process of removing the blood-soaked bandages to examine his injuries. What she found made her stomach clench with fear. Aldrich had taken 3 arrows, one to the right shoulder that was still embedded in the muscle, one to his left side that had been removed but showed signs of infection, and one that had grazed his left thigh, leaving a deep furrow in the flesh. In addition, he had a sword cut across his ribs on the right side, not deep enough to penetrate the chest cavity, but deep enough to require stitching. "How did you survive this?" Rosalind whispered as she worked, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her. "How did you stay conscious, stay alive, with these wounds?" "Because I made you a promise," Aldrich replied through gritted teeth as she began cleaning the infected wound on his side. "I promised I would come back to you, and I keep my promises. I refused to die on that battlefield, refused to let myself fall. I kept thinking of you, of your face, of the life we are going to have together. That kept me fighting, kept me alive." Martha prepared a strong, pain-relieving tea made from willow bark and poppy, which Aldrich drank gratefully. Once it had taken effect and his breathing had eased slightly, Rosalind began the delicate work of extracting the arrow still embedded in his shoulder. Martha held him steady while Rosalind used a sharp knife to carefully cut away the flesh around the arrowhead, then gripped the shaft and pulled with firm, steady pressure. Aldrich groaned in pain but did not cry out. His jaw clenched so hard Rosalind could see the muscles jumping beneath his skin. The arrow came free with a sickening sound, bringing with it a fresh flow of blood. Rosalind immediately packed the wound with a poultice made from yarrow and comfrey, then began stitching it closed with careful, precise movements she had perfected over years of practice. Next, she turned her attention to the infected wound on his side. The flesh around it was hot and inflamed, angry red streaks radiating outward that spoke of poison spreading through his body. She cleaned it thoroughly with strong wine, ignoring Aldrich's hiss of pain, then applied a different poultice made from honey, garlic, and herbs known for fighting infection. She stitched this wound as well, then moved on to the sword cut and the arrow graze on his thigh. By the time she had finished treating all his wounds and wrapping him in clean bandages, both Rosalind and Aldrich were exhausted. The pain medicine had made him drowsy, and his eyes were beginning to drift closed, despite his efforts to keep them open. "Sleep now," Rosalind urged gently, brushing the sweat-dampened hair back from his forehead. "Your body needs rest to heal. I will be here when you wake. I promise you that. Do not leave me," Aldrich murmured, his hand finding hers and gripping it weakly. "Please, Rosalind. I have spent months dreaming of you, longing for you. Now that I am finally back, I cannot bear to have you out of my sight." "I will not leave you," Rosalind assured him, settling into the chair beside his bed, the same chair she had occupied during his first recovery. "I will be right here, watching over you, for as long as you need me." Aldrich's eyes finally closed, and his breathing deepened into the rhythms of sleep. But even unconscious, he kept his hand wrapped around hers, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. Martha placed a hand on Rosalind's shoulder. "I will have food and drink brought for you, and I will check on him regularly throughout the night. But my lady, you must promise me you will rest as well. Sitting vigil is one thing, but you cannot run yourself into the ground." "I will rest when I know he is out of danger," Rosalind replied. "That infection worries me, Martha. It has already spread further than I would like. The next few days will be critical." The healer nodded gravely. "I know. But you saved him once before from the very brink of death. You can do it again. Have faith in yourself, child." The battle against infection proved every bit as difficult as Rosalind had feared. Aldrich's fever spiked that night, climbing so high that he became delirious, crying out in his sleep about battles and fallen comrades, calling for Rosalind even though she sat right beside him. She bathed his burning skin with cool water, forced willow bark tea between his cracked lips, changed his bandages frequently as the infected wound continued to weep. For 3 days and nights, Rosalind barely left his side. She dozed in the chair when exhaustion overtook her, woke at the slightest change in his breathing, monitored his fever with relentless vigilance. Her father visited regularly, bringing food she barely touched and offering words of encouragement that she barely heard. Martha spelled her for brief periods so she could attend to necessary functions, but Rosalind always returned within minutes, unable to stay away. On the 4th day, as dawn was breaking, Aldrich's fever finally broke. Rosalind woke from a light doze to find him looking at her with clear eyes, the terrible heat finally receding from his skin. She let out a sob of relief and pressed her forehead against their joined hands. "You came back to me," she whispered. "Again. You keep coming back to me." "Always," Aldrich replied, his voice hoarse but strong. "I will always come back to you, Rosalind. Death itself could not keep me from you. We proved that the first time." Over the following weeks, Aldrich's recovery progressed steadily. The wounds healed cleanly once the infection was conquered, and color gradually returned to his face. He was able to sit up, then to stand and walk around the chamber, and finally to venture out into the manor itself. The other wounded soldiers who had served with him at the River Swale greeted him with respect and affection, calling him their captain and crediting him with saving many of their lives during that brutal battle. One evening, as they sat together in their chamber watching the summer sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose, Aldrich shared the full story of what had happened at the River Swale. "We had to take that crossing," he explained, his arm around Rosalind's shoulders as they sat together on the window seat. "The rebels held the high ground on the far bank, and they had fortified their position well. Our commander wanted to wait for reinforcements, but the king's orders were clear. We were to advance immediately, whatever the cost. He paused, his jaw tightening with the memory. I knew it would be a slaughter if we tried a frontal assault, so I proposed a different strategy. We would send a small force downstream to cross at a shallower point, then attack the rebels from behind while the main force assaulted from the front. It was risky, and I knew the small force would take the worst of it, so I volunteered to lead them myself. Rosalind's breath caught. You put yourself in the most dangerous position. Again. It was the only honorable choice, Aldrich said simply. I could not ask my men to take risks I was unwilling to take myself. We crossed the river in the early morning mist, 20 men against 200. We came at them from behind, just as the main force began their assault from the front. The rebels were caught between us, and the confusion worked in our favor. But they fought back hard, and that is when I took the arrows and the sword cut. Yet you survived, Rosalind said, her hand resting over his heart, feeling its steady beat beneath her palm. You survived, and you kept your promise to come home to me. I had no choice, Aldrich replied, turning to face her fully. You are my home, Rosalind. Wherever you are, that is where I belong. And I have been thinking, during these weeks of recovery, about the future, about what comes next. What do you mean? Rosalind asked, though her heart was already beginning to race with hope. Aldrich took both her hands in his. The battle at the river swale was a turning point. The rebels have been pushed back, their supply lines cut, their strongest positions taken. The king's generals believe the war will be over within the year, and when it ends, I will be free to leave military service. I have served honorably, fulfilled my oaths and obligations. I can return to civilian life with my reputation intact. He drew a breath and continued, Your father has made me an offer. He has no sons, no heir to inherit Thornfield Manor and his estates. He has asked if I would be willing to serve as his steward, to learn the management of his holdings so that when the time comes, you and I can take over the running of everything. He wants to know that his life's work will be in good hands, that the land and people he has cared for will be protected after he is gone. Tears began to stream down Rosalind's face. He offered you that. He wants you to be his heir. He said you are his greatest treasure, and any man you chose to marry must be worth something extraordinary. Aldrich replied, his own eyes glistening. He said he has come to think of me as the son he never had, and he would be honored if I would accept this responsibility. Rosalind, if I take this position, it means we can have a real life together. A home, children, a future that does not involve me riding off to war, and you waiting in terror for my return. We can grow old together, watching our children play in these gardens, knowing that each morning we wake together will not be our last. Rosalind threw her arms around his neck, sobbing with joy and relief. Yes, she said against his shoulder. Yes, Aldrich, accept his offer. Let us build that life together, the one we both dreamed of but were afraid to hope for. Let us be happy. The autumn arrived at Thornfield Manor in a blaze of gold and crimson, the trees surrounding the estate transforming into a tapestry of fire-bright leaves that rustled in the crisp breeze. It had been 4 months since Aldrich's return from the river swale. 4 months of healing and growing stronger. 4 months of learning the intricate details of managing Lord Edmund's estates alongside his father-in-law. The war in the north had indeed begun to wind down, just as the generals had predicted. The rebel forces, weakened by their losses and cut off from supplies, had begun surrendering in significant numbers. King Edmund had declared that by winter's end the conflict would be formally concluded, and his soldiers would return home to their families. For Aldrich, that meant his military service was drawing to a close. He had received official word from the king himself, a letter praising his valor and dedication, noting his wounds and sacrifices, and granting him an honorable discharge from active duty. The letter had also included a royal commendation and a modest grant of land in recognition of his service, a small estate in the southern territories that would provide additional income for his family. But more importantly, the letter meant Aldrich was free to build the life he and Rosalind had dreamed of during those dark nights when death seemed to lurk around every corner, free to wake each morning knowing he would not have to ride into battle, would not have to choose between duty and the woman he loved, free to simply be a husband, and soon, God willing, a father, because Rosalind was with child. They had discovered it in late summer, confirmed by Martha's experienced examination, and Rosalind's own knowledge of healing and the human body. The baby would come in early spring, a new life born from the love that had blossomed between two souls who had found each other across the boundaries of death itself. Lord Edmund had wept with joy when they told him, embracing them both and declaring that his prayers had been answered. He would have grandchildren to spoil, heirs to carry on the family name and legacy, and most importantly, he would see his beloved daughter happy and fulfilled in the way her mother would have wanted. As the preparations for the grand wedding celebration that had been postponed due to the war finally began in earnest, Rosalind found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. It seemed impossible that less than a year had passed since that cold winter morning when a dying soldier had been carried through the doors of Thornfield Manor. Less than a year since she had held Aldrich in her arms and felt his heart stop, had begged God not to take him from her. Less than a year since he had opened his eyes and told her about seeing her in a garden of light, in a place between life and death where souls recognized each other. She stood now in that same eastern chamber where it had all begun, though it had been converted back to a guest room once Aldrich had recovered enough to move to their shared quarters. She could still remember every detail of those early days, the fear, the hope, the growing connection that had seemed inexplicable yet undeniable. She could still hear his voice telling her about his vision, still feel the electric current that had passed between them the first time their hands touched. "Penny for your thoughts, my love," Aldrich said from the doorway, and Rosalind turned to find her husband watching her with that gentle smile that never failed to make her heart skip a beat. He looked healthy and strong now, fully recovered from his wounds, though new scars marked his body as reminders of how close they had come to losing each other a second time. His dark hair was slightly longer than he had worn it as a soldier, and he had grown more comfortable in the fine clothing of a gentleman rather than the armor of a warrior. He looked happy, truly happy, in a way she suspected he had never been before. "I was remembering," Rosalind said, crossing to him and taking his hands. "Remembering that first day, when they brought you here more dead than alive. Remembering how terrified I was that I would lose you before I even had the chance to know you. Remembering the moment your heart stopped, and the miracle of feeling it start again." Aldrich pulled her close, one hand resting gently on the slight swell of her belly where their child grew. "I remember it too. I remember the darkness and the light and seeing you in that garden. I remember making the choice to return, not knowing why, except that every fiber of my being told me I had to. And I remember opening my eyes and seeing you sitting beside my bed, and knowing that I had made the right choice, that everything I would endure from that moment forward would be worth it because it meant being with you. Do you still think about it?" Rosalind asked quietly. "That vision, that place you saw, do you still wonder what it meant?" Aldrich was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "I used to wonder constantly. I used to lie awake at night trying to understand it, trying to make sense of something that defied all logic and reason. But I have come to realize that perhaps understanding is not necessary. Perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain mysteries, and we are meant to simply accept the gifts they bring us. You are my gift, Rosalind. You and this child and the life we are building together. Whether my vision was real or fever dream, whether it was divine intervention or some working of fate beyond our comprehension, it does not matter. What matters is that I am here with you, that we found each other, and that we chose to love each other despite all the obstacles and uncertainties." Rosalind felt tears prickling at her eyes, though these were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I love you, Aldrich Brennan. I love you more than I ever thought it possible to love another person. You have given me everything I ever wanted without even knowing I wanted it. A partner who sees me, who values my mind as much as my heart, who stands beside me rather than trying to control me. You have given me hope for a future I had stopped believing in. And you have given me a home," Aldrich replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just this manor, not just these walls and lands, but a true home in every sense of the word. You are my sanctuary, Rosalind, my safe harbor, the place where I can lay down my weapons and simply be a man rather than a warrior. You have healed more than just my body. You have healed my soul." They kissed then, a kiss that held all their love and gratitude and wonder at the life they had found together. When they finally drew apart, Rosalind rested her head against Aldrich's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, the heart that had stopped and started again, the heart that beat for her. The grand wedding celebration took place on a perfect October afternoon, when the autumn leaves were at their most brilliant, and the air was crisp but not yet cold. Lords and ladies from across the region had been invited, and Thornfield Manor was filled to capacity with guests. Aldrich's family had made the journey from the south, his father Lord Robert, his eldest brother Robert the Younger with his wife and children, and even his middle brother Geoffrey, who had secured leave from his duties at Canterbury to witness his youngest brother's happiness. The ceremony itself was held in the manor's chapel, which had been decorated with garlands of autumn flowers and evergreen boughs. But unlike their small, private wedding months before, this celebration was a grand affair with music and pageantry befitting the union of Lord Edmund's only daughter to a decorated war hero. The bishop presided once again, blessing their union before God and witnesses, and when Aldrich and Rosalind exchanged their vows for the second time, there was not a dry eye in the chapel. Rosalind wore a gown of deep emerald green velvet, the color bringing out the vivid green of her eyes, embroidered with gold thread in patterns of vines and flowers. The dress had been specially tailored to accommodate her growing belly, which was now obvious enough that several guests whispered with delight about the coming heir. Her dark auburn hair was dressed in an elaborate style woven with ribbons and autumn flowers, and she wore a circlet of gold set with emeralds that had belonged to her mother. Aldrich wore a doublet of midnight blue velvet over a white linen shirt with breeches of fine wool and tall leather boots. A cloak of heavy blue wool, lined with gray fur, hung from his shoulders, fastened with a silver brooch bearing the Merrick family crest, a gift from Lord Edmund symbolizing Aldrich's formal acceptance as heir to the Merrick estates. He looked every inch the noble lord he was becoming, though Rosalind could still see the warrior beneath the fine clothing, the strength and courage that had first drawn her to him. The feast that followed was magnificent, with tables laden with roasted meats, fresh bread, autumn vegetables prepared in countless ways, pies both sweet and savory, and wine that flowed like water. Musicians played while guests danced, and toasts were offered celebrating the bride and groom, wishing them long life and many children, praising Aldrich's service to the king and Rosalind's dedication to healing the wounded. Lord Robert the Elder, Aldrich's father, rose to offer a toast that brought tears to many eyes. "I have 3 sons," he said, his voice carrying across the hall. "Each has chosen his own path in life, and I am proud of all of them. But I confess that I worried most about my youngest. Aldrich chose the way of the sword, a dangerous path that has claimed too many good men. I feared I would receive word of his death in battle, that I would never see him find the peace and happiness he deserved. But God had other plans. He brought my son to this place, to this family, to this extraordinary woman who saved his life not once but twice. And in doing so, God gave Aldrich something more precious than lands or titles or glory in battle. He gave him love, and a home, and a future. To Aldrich and Rosalind, may their love endure through all the years to come, and may they know the joy of watching their children and grandchildren grow in this beautiful place." As the evening wore on and the celebration continued, Rosalind found herself standing at one of the tall windows overlooking the gardens, watching the moon rise over the frost-touched landscape. Aldrich came to stand beside her, slipping his arm around her waist and pulling her close. "Happy, my love?" he asked softly. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Rosalind replied, leaning into his warmth. "Sometimes I still cannot quite believe this is real, that you are truly here with me, that we have this life together. It feels like a dream I might wake from at any moment." "It is real," Aldrich assured her, his hand moving to rest on her belly where their child moved beneath his palm. "As real as this little one growing inside you, as real as the love I feel for you every moment of every day. We have been given a gift, Rosalind, a second chance, a new beginning, a life together that we fought for and earned, and I intend to cherish every moment of it." As the winter months passed, Rosalind's belly grew round with their child. She continued her work in the healing ward as long as she was able, training younger healers in her methods and techniques so that her knowledge would not be lost. Aldrich spent his days working alongside Lord Edmund, learning everything about the management of the estates, the tenant farmers and their needs, the harvest schedules, the account books and legal matters, the delicate politics of maintaining good relationships with neighboring lords. They also spent time preparing the nursery, choosing a sunny room in the family wing and furnishing it with a carved wooden cradle that had been Rosalind's when she was a baby, soft blankets and tiny clothes, and all the supplies a new baby would need. Aldrich painted the walls himself, choosing a soft yellow that would work for either a boy or a girl, and carved small animals to hang above the cradle: a horse, a bird, a rabbit, each one crafted with loving detail during the long winter evenings. On a cold night in late February, as snow fell softly outside the windows, Rosalind's labor began. Martha and the midwife took charge with calm efficiency, sending Aldrich to pace anxiously in the corridor while they attended to his wife. Lord Edmund joined him, the two men keeping vigil together as the hours stretched on, and Rosalind's cries of pain echoed through the manor. "I cannot bear this," Aldrich said, his hands clenched into fists as another cry reached them. "I have faced enemy armies, have taken wounds that should have killed me, but this is worse than any battle. I am helpless to help her, powerless to ease her pain." "Welcome to fatherhood," Lord Edmund said with a gentle smile. "This is the price we men pay for the miracle of new life. We must stand aside and trust that the women are strong enough to bring our children into the world. And I promise you, my son, Rosalind is strong enough. She has your strength and her mother's courage. She will come through this just fine." As dawn broke over Thornfield Manor, painting the snow-covered world in shades of pink and gold, a new cry joined Rosalind's, the strong, lusty wail of a newborn baby. Aldrich burst through the door before anyone could stop him, his eyes frantically searching for Rosalind. He found her propped up in their bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. "Come meet your daughter," Rosalind said, her voice tired but filled with joy. "Come meet Lady Catherine Brennan, named for my mother." Aldrich approached slowly, almost reverently, his eyes wide with wonder as Rosalind placed the baby in his arms. The infant had stopped crying and was looking up at him with dark blue eyes that would probably turn brown or green as she grew, her tiny fist waving in the air. She had a cap of dark hair and her mother's delicate features, and Aldrich fell completely in love in that instant. "She is perfect," he whispered, tears streaming freely down his face. "Catherine, our Catherine. Thank you, Rosalind. Thank you for this gift, for this miracle." As the new family sat together in the early morning light, Aldrich holding his daughter while Rosalind leaned against his shoulder, they heard Lord Edmund's voice from the doorway. "May I come in and meet my granddaughter?" "Of course, father," Rosalind said with a smile. "Come meet Catherine." Lord Edmund crossed to the bed, his own eyes wet with tears as he gazed down at the baby in Aldrich's arms. "She looks just like you did when you were born, Rosalind. Just like your mother. Oh, my darling girls, how proud she would be to see this day. How proud I am." In the months and years that followed, Thornfield Manor became truly alive again in a way it had not been since before Rosalind's mother died. Little Catherine grew from a tiny infant into a curious toddler who delighted in exploring the gardens with her father, learning the names of flowers from her mother, and being spoiled terribly by her grandfather. 2 years after Catherine's birth, she was joined by a brother, Edmund, named for both his grandfather and the king. And 2 years after that, another daughter arrived, whom they named Elaine. The war in the north was indeed concluded, just as the king had promised. Peace returned to England, and the soldiers who survived came home to rebuild their lives. Some of them, those who had been treated at Thornfield, came back to visit, to thank Lady Rosalind for saving their lives and to marvel at how their fierce Captain Brennan had transformed into a devoted husband and father. Aldrich never again lifted a sword in anger. He became known throughout the region as a wise and fair steward of the Merrick estates, beloved by the tenant farmers for his understanding of their struggles, respected by neighboring lords for his intelligence and honor. But more than any of that, he was known as a man who loved his wife with a devotion that inspired songs and stories, who looked at her each day as if she were the greatest treasure in all the world. And Rosalind, she continued her healing work, though now she trained others to carry on the tradition, passing her knowledge to a new generation of healers. She wrote detailed texts about her methods and techniques, creating a library of medical knowledge that would help save countless lives in the years to come. But her greatest joy was her family, her husband who had died and come back to her, her children who filled the halls of Thornfield with laughter, her father who lived to see his grandchildren grow. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Aldrich and Rosalind stood together in the gardens of Thornfield on a perfect spring evening, watching their children play among the flowers that were just beginning to bloom. Catherine, now 8 years old, was teaching her younger siblings how to make flower crowns, her patient instruction reminding Aldrich so much of Rosalind that it made his heart ache with love. "Do you ever think about it anymore?" Rosalind asked, slipping her hand into Aldrich's. "That vision you had, that garden of light where you saw me." Aldrich was quiet for a moment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. "Sometimes," he admitted, "especially when I look at you and our children and this beautiful life we have built together, I think about how close I came to never knowing any of it, how a different choice in that moment between life and death would have meant losing all of this. And I think about how you appeared to me in that place, how you gave me the choice to return, and how every single day since then has been a gift I never take for granted." He turned to face her fully, cupping her face in his hands the way he had done so many times over the years. "I think perhaps that vision was meant to show me what was waiting for me if I chose to live. Not just you as you appeared in that moment, but everything you represented. Love, home, family, peace, purpose, everything I had been searching for without even knowing it. And every day I wake beside you, every time I watch our children laugh or hold you in my arms, I thank God or fate or whatever power brought us together for giving me that choice and the wisdom to make the right one." Rosalind stood on her toes to kiss him, a kiss that still held all the passion and tenderness of their early days together. "I love you, Aldrich Brennan. I loved you from the moment I saw you, though I did not understand it then. I loved you when I held you in my arms and felt your heart stop. I loved you when you opened your eyes and told me your impossible story. And I love you now, more than ever, with the kind of love that grows deeper and stronger with each passing year." "And I love you, Rosalind," Aldrich replied. "My wife, my healer, my home, my everything. You saved my life twice, once with your skilled hands and dedicated care, and once with your love and the promise of a future worth living for. I am the man I am today because of you, and I will spend every remaining day of my life showing you how grateful I am for that gift." As the sun set over Thornfield Manor and the children ran to their parents for evening embraces, as Lord Edmund watched from the window with tears of joy in his eyes, as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Aldrich and Rosalind held each other close. They had been given a miracle, a love that transcended the boundaries between life and death, a connection that had been forged in the most unlikely of circumstances and had grown into something more beautiful and enduring than either of them could have imagined. Their story would be told for generations in the halls of Thornfield Manor, the tale of the wounded soldier who died in the healer's arms but whose love was strong enough to bring him back, the vision of a garden of light that showed him his future, and the extraordinary woman who had appeared to him in that vision and then became his reality. It was a story of courage and devotion, of choices made in the face of impossible odds, of love that conquered even death itself. And as Aldrich and Rosalind walked back to the manor with their children, their hands clasped together, their hearts beating in perfect synchrony, they knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together, because they had already survived the impossible, had already been tested by forces beyond their understanding, and their love had proven stronger than anything that could be thrown against it. They had found each other across the void between life and death, had chosen each other when that choice meant accepting uncertainty and risk, and had built a life together that was richer and more fulfilling than either had ever dreamed possible. And that, they both knew, was the truest miracle of all. Not the vision or the recovery or any of the extraordinary events that had brought them together, but the simple, profound gift of loving and being loved in return, of building a home and raising a family, of growing old together knowing that every day was precious because of how easily it all could have been lost. As night fell over Thornfield Manor and the family gathered for their evening meal, as laughter echoed through the halls that had once been filled with the groans of wounded soldiers, as Aldrich and Rosalind shared a smile across the table that spoke of shared memories and unshakable devotion, their story came to its perfect conclusion. Not an ending, but rather a new beginning that would continue for all their days. A love story written in the stars, forged in the fires of war and suffering, and made eternal by two souls who had recognized each other in a garden of light, and had chosen, against all odds, to fight their way back to each other, and build a future worthy of that extraordinary beginning.